Welcome to Discourse Politics, everybody. Today we are going to go over what a lawyer in Michigan who was on the Republican side went through on the night of the elections around that alleged time frame where they said they were going to stop counting, and then mysteriously Donald Trump's lead diminished quite rapidly. So this is what a lawyer on the Trump side went through on that night during that time period. So let's get into it. So after they said they were done counting and everybody went home, this lawyer decided to check out what was going on at the place where they were supposed to be counting ballots, where they said they weren't going to resume until 9 or 10 a.m., but this is about 2 or 3 in the morning, and this is what she saw. So the first piece of footage that we're going to go over is really suspect. And what it is that ballots are supposed to have a chain of custody and they're supposed to have security. And the reason is because you don't want any ballot tampering to happen. You don't want anything strange to happen with the ballots. And what happens is that election officials typically of both sides, just to make sure that this is fair, will watch ballots be put into boxes. Those boxes will be sealed, and then the chain of custody will continue all the way over to where they're going to be counted. In this video, it shows the guy just kind of showing up all willy-nilly, all by himself, loading up a box of whatever. And by the way, this is several hours after the polls closed. There's really no reason that this should be happening at 3 in the morning. What took somebody until 3 in the morning to show up with these ballots? But nonetheless, anyway, there's somebody loading up a box of ballots into what appears to be a wagon, and then that wagon is just brought inside. So here it is. And so this is her firsthand account of everything that she sort of went through, starting with seeing the ballot box come out of this van.
Well, I actually went up there. All the polls were closed, and I went up there after we had all gotten back to the hotel. I was kind of watching the news and decided I was going to go check on, it's called Kobo. And so I thought I'd go downtown and check out how the absentee ballots were being counted and see if they were still counting, because I had actually heard on the news that they weren't going to be counting anymore.
That's exactly. So we were doing the election stream all night. And keep in mind that into that point, when we were about to go to bed, they said we're going to reconvene. I think they said at 9 a.m. or they said at 10 a.m. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, an hour later, there was a huge jump in Michigan for Biden. So yes, we were there last night. People can corroborate it. 8 million people watched. They said no more counting. And that's when you started filming this video, right?
I wanted to point out something that's really strange. If you go to debunking websites and you listen to the mainstream media, what the mainstream media tells you right now is that no organization said they were going to stop counting in the middle of the night. Yet I remember it. I think Red Eagle Politics, who I was kind of watching too, he remembers it. Steven Crowder was doing a live election stream. They remember it. 8 million people watching Steven Crowder remembers the announcement by the news that they were going to stop counting. Now, keep in mind, this ballot box showing up and the 100,000 votes that mysteriously showed up, or the huge gains that Joe Biden was making, showed up around the time period they said that they were going to stop counting votes. So we're not crazy, and a lot of these debunking websites and debunking mainstream media points have basically said that there was no stopping of the counting of the votes, but everybody remembers it. And this is a lawyer on the ground in Michigan. She was even told that they weren't going to count any more votes that night. They were going to resume the next morning. So this is all taking place in that time period where they said there was no more counting going on, yet mysteriously a whole bunch of counting went on all through the night.
Well, yeah. And so as soon as I heard that, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go down there and just check and make sure that they actually are cutting it off, because I would hate people to leave or not be down there checking on things and they be doing something shady. So I went down and then come back and park for the night because they were active. So I left, and as I was walking out the door, I see this white van pull up. And as I stopped for a second, turned on my phone, you saw the video where I kind of like walk around and I see he's pulling out like an old radio flyer wagon and is like connecting it. And then I get in the car and I see him like drop the box. And that was pretty much, we had worked polling stations for the night. And that's, very similar to the box that we had seen and been watching and monitoring to make sure that it got locked and removed from the polling stations, put in vehicles and driven to the secure locations.
Right.
So it was just one of those where I was like, that's kind of weird. So
then she goes on to describe how unsecured that this place was, where people could just be walking in and out with bags, with coolers, these huge bags. And here's the thing. This is all speculation. And I don't think this this video in particular is evidence of anything, because there's plenty of reasons why people would be bringing bags into these locations. You know, it could be their lunch, could be just the stuff that they bring with them. You know, I know a lot of people carry bags for whatever reason. So it could be completely benign, but it is just strange how unsecure that this area is.
And that's where they were counting, and this is at that time when we had been told they had stopped counting. They weren't supposed to be counting.
And of course, that too is kind of a red flag. This is the time period where they're not even supposed to be counting anymore, because they put out in the press that they weren't counting anymore. So,
correct. And the concern was just the security concern. We don't really know what was going on with, or what items they were bringing in, or who was going in, or any of those things.
Yeah.
That wasn't actually ironically, the issue with Wisconsin came in at shift change. All of that, where you see most of that luggage coming in, is at their shift change at 4:30, 5 in the morning.
Wow. Because you know what? We had to end the stream, was it right about 4 o'clock? Right about 4 o'clock in the morning is when we ended. We wanted to stay here throughout the entire night. Yeah. And then they said, we are going to reconvene later today and count. And then I took a nap, an hour nap in a hammock. I'm not exaggerating. And I woke up and Michigan had entirely changed. It happened right at that time.
It happened right in front of my eyes. And all I could think was, what the heck? You know, all I saw was all this stuff going in.
Now, what would you say to people who just say, well, that's also because all these votes are just Wayne County, and that's heavily liberal? Would we expect that kind of a turnaround? I mean, there was a huge lead going into, or a big lead at that point by many, what was it, 6 points, Michigan, 8 points at that point before about 4:30 a.m. What would you say to people who would argue that?
So listen to this, and this is kind of important. She's going to go through her timeline of the day. What she did is she went from polling place to polling place, and what she saw was there was almost no turnout in the inner cities. There was almost no turnout in the areas where all of these ballots mysteriously showed up. Yet in the urban centers and outside of the cities, it was bustling and people were voting. So just listen to her response here, because it's important.
So this is actually just kind of an interesting thought, because we thought going into last night,
turn down the clip.
We were doing great in Michigan. We had been working Michigan.
Right.
All of us spent yesterday, all of the attorneys, we spent roaming around, checking precincts, we did Detroit, we did the suburbs, we did all the different areas to see how many people were, at the polling locations. And I will tell you that suburbia, loaded. You could tell people were packed in there. They were busy all day. You go into inner city Detroit, nobody was in there. So we were like, shoot, we got this. Like, yeah, heck yeah, we did good.
Right.
And then we come into this, and it's like, what the heck? All of these absentee ballots pop up, and we're just, okay.
Well, but couldn't it just be that people voted early, and that's what they're finally bringing in? I mean, that's what people would argue, right? Well, these are just early ballots, and they're counting them now, and that's a liberal county.
Well, okay, so another thing, too, is that when I left this morning, they were looking, or right after I left, they announced that they basically were around 16,000 uncounted absentee ballots.
Right.
That's what they were working on. And then by 10 a.m., it jumped to about 30 to 35,000. There was like about a 10-minute gap between 30 and 35.
Right.
And then the next thing we know, we're up to 120-something thousand.
So keep in mind, this is kind of what I said in my other video. This is after all the Republican votes kind of came in. After the Republican votes came in, then all of a sudden, these absentee ballots started showing up out of nowhere. And just looking at my numbers, Michigan was supposed to get about 100,000 extra votes for Joe Biden in absentees total. This is just one county, one precinct, and this is one group of absentee ballots that showed up after all the mail-in ballots were accounted for and after the in-person voting was accounted for. So these are extra ballots that showed up on top of what was already there. So they were expecting 16,000 additional ballots that they didn't get ready because they showed up on Election Day. And then again, because all the Republican ballots are in, it seems kind of fishy that they had 16,000 absentee ballots. And then by 10 a.m., they announce, oh, we have 35,000 to count. And then shortly thereafter, like, oh, no, really, it's about 120,000 absentee ballots that we have to count. So it's a little bit strange. And here's the thing. Maybe those are legitimate votes and maybe those are from legitimate voters. But it seems really suspect that after Republican votes are counted, and they know what benchmark they have to meet, their absentee ballots go from 16,000 that they told the lawyers, we have 16,000 to count. Then by 10 a.m. the next morning, oh, we have 35,000 to count. And then shortly thereafter, it was, we have 126,000 to count. This is one precinct, one county. Okay. In Michigan, one. So they went from 16,000 to 130,000. Does that seem normal to anybody else? And then if that wasn't weird enough, then they kicked the lawyers out of the area, and then they wouldn't let people watch the count. So then they put up these whiteboard barriers, and here's what she had to say about that, and then we'll also watch the video.
I actually lived it already this afternoon.
Okay.
Our attorneys, I've actually been here at the hotel. I've not slept yet. And so we were working on some of this stuff, but some of the other attorneys with the group, they were kicked out. They weren't allowed in. And so they've been down here at the hotel and not able to go anywhere. So
okay, well, let's show this video here that's going on at Fox News. So if you can confirm it, do we have that video here? Let's show it. So this is what they were doing. Why would they put up, what is that commonplace? Can someone?
So then not only were attorneys on the Republican side kicked out of the area where they were counting votes, but then they also put up this whiteboard so that you couldn't see what was going on behind it. So it begs the question, if we're having transparent elections and transparent election counting, why was it that there were 16,000 votes accounted for? Why was it that the Republicans were kicked out from the places that these votes were being counted? How is it that mysteriously it went from 16,000 to 35,000 to 120,000? And why then are they trying to keep people from seeing what's going on behind this board where they're counting votes? And, you know, so I think the lawyer puts it best when she sort of ends with this.
Well, I mean, if you're trying to show that you're transparent and that these are legitimate elections, you should have that open ability to look in and at least observe to make sure that people are following protocols and there's some kind of, process that's being, compliant.
I thought that was the purpose to doing it. I've never been to a polling station where it wasn't all glass.
Why would they kick the lawyers out that are on the Republican side when she's, trying to film some things that are going on, when she's trying to sort of bring up legitimate questions about the efficacy of how these votes are being counted? And here's her response.
Well, so it's really funny because I started, as soon as I got back this morning, I tried to start kind of discussing with different people the concerns I had and the things I had witnessed overnight. Mm-hmm. And so it got around in just this little group, in this little area. So I'm pretty sure it was probably discussed over there, and that's probably their response was somebody's in there recording, and so let's, lock them out.
So think about that for a second. I know that this is her conjecture, and we need to be clear about that. This is her conjecture, but at the same time, it kind of makes sense. They were outside those windows trying to record what was going on behind those doors. And for them to put up that whiteboard, that is purely to keep people from seeing what's going on behind those closed doors. Now, was there anything nefarious going on? I don't know. It's hard to prove. That's the problem with this. It's impossible to prove.
What do you think happened there in Detroit?
Well, I generally don't think you try to hide something if you're being transparent and honest.
Right.
I mean, that's generally, that's kind of how we see things, right?
Yeah.
If you're upfront and doing the right thing,
right,
then you're happy to have people observe and see that you're doing what you're supposed to do by the people in your community, right?
Right.
So, I mean, the only thing that would lead me to believe is that they are doing something
that is inherently dishonest, and it would seem to coincide with something that was almost nonsensical as far as the number jump.
So now that we've established that there's something strange going on here, no hardcore evidence, but just something strange, what can be done about it on a legal basis?
What do we do? How do we fight this?
And what I would say is there's probably a million different ways. We saw from the Supreme Court rulings leading up to the election, there's a lot of different ways you can invalidate or otherwise allow voting to happen and create spoiled votes or invalid votes. Kelly's right. There's going to be a lot of decisions to be made by the party directly affected, so the RNC or the GOP in Michigan and nationally. But what it does is raises a lot of questions. What we'll really have to know is what is happening inside of that room, right?
Right.
What is happening, what problems have been created related from the lax security. And again, at the very least, let's say Biden wins, it raises questions. Let's say Trump wins, it raises questions.
Right.
All it does is delay. And again, in one of the most central precincts in a battleground state for this to be happening, and then for this afternoon for it to, you're really doubling down on the problems by saying we may have had a problem, but we're going to definitely cover up any resolution of the problem because then you'll believe it's getting done. It raises a lot of questions.
Well, I mean, there is a confusing process, and then there is no security, and then for some reason they are proactively deciding to cover up the remainder of that process. And all of this happened. All of the video that you just saw happened around the time when we went to bed and we were told that they were not going to be doing any more counting. That looked, when you look in that room, that looked like elves before Christmas.
There was a lot of people up in there.
So I want to give my full and honest opinion here, and that is this. Fraud has a legal definition and a legal connotation behind it. The issue is that none of this proves anything. And the problem with that is that all we have is circumstantial evidence. If you look at what was projected by not just me, but by Target Smart and other places, that even if you gave a 65-35 or 70-30 breakdown of early votes to the Biden campaign, Biden should not have had any more than, say, 100 or 120 votes. And that if Republicans showed up and was ahead by more than 150,000 votes, we could have felt secure in the idea that Trump was going to win. And what happened on Election Day is he was up by 400,000, 300,000 or 400,000 in Wisconsin. He was up by 400,000 or 500,000 in Michigan. He was up by 750,000 in Pennsylvania. And the one in Pennsylvania kind of makes sense because if you actually look at the math, it was possible that Joe Biden was ahead by somewhere between 700,000 and 850,000 votes in Pennsylvania. It was not the case in Michigan or Wisconsin. And so for these votes to just kind of show up out of nowhere and for there to be such a huge number of absentee ballots that were counted in the final hour in that time period in which we were told that no counting was going to go on, something is suspect. But I have to give you my honest opinion, and that is this. None of this is provable in court. None of it. So we're sitting here with nothing more than conjecture. And it's upsetting because it seems like, mathematically speaking, that what happened was, at the very least, if all these Biden votes are legitimate, what happened was that at the very least, the Democrats used the rules during the pandemic to gather up a bunch of absentee ballots and have them vote for an empty suit. Joe Biden is an empty suit. Let's face it, he's just an empty suit that's pretty terrible. They loaded up these ballots knowing that they needed them, that all these Republicans were going to show up on Election Day and swamp the polls. They did it. Mathematically speaking, they should have won, but these absentee ballots showed up out of nowhere. And here's the thing. Nobody's going to know unless someone steps forward. And even if someone stepped forward, no one's going to know where these ballots came from. Even if we were to assume that they were all legitimate, why then the whiteboard? Why then kicking out the lawyers? Why then do they have to do things in secret when this is supposed to be an open process? It's beyond belief. A link in the description below for that whole entire video on Crowder, if somehow you didn't see it. I'll put a link in the description below. I'll let everyone come to their own conclusions. I personally believe that something shady went on, and unfortunately, I also believe that there's no way to prove it. So here we are with nothing but conjecture, but it's pretty strong conjecture that this election was not on the up and up. But unfortunately, I don't think there's any legal way to prove it, so here we are. But nonetheless, this is Angry Discourse Politics signing off. Share with your friends, like and subscribe. Thank you.